As sports history fans, we often reminisce about the legends. Willis Reed limping onto the NBA Finals court, Kurt Schilling's bloody sock, Kerry Strug's courageous dismount, and so many more. These moments often define sports history. But what about the countless injuries that did not become legends, or careers that were derailed due to inadequate care? That's where this episode's sponsor comes in. Introducing to you, ILP Sports Consultants, your trusted sports injury partner, available 24/7. Brian Maelli at ILP Sports Consultants has over 20 years of experience in the orthopedic and sports medicine industry, and he has worked with athletes across the gamut, from youth to amateurs, professionals, in almost every sport played in the United States of America, accommodating athletes at every stage of their career. This adaptability ensures that ILP services are perfectly tailored to your skill level, no matter where you are in your athletic journey. With ILP, you are in control. Choose the steps that matter most to you. Diagnosis, treatment plan, recovery, or the whole journey. ILP services are tailored to your unique needs. Rushing for care is a common pitfall, leading to future problems. ILP Sports Consultants helps you make the right decisions, ensuring that you receive timely and safe care. And here's a bonus. Brian hosts the Injured List podcast, sharing insights and athlete stories you won't want to miss. Whether you're a concerned parent or grandparent, or an athlete yourself seeking guidance, ILP Sports Consultants is your beacon of hope in sports injury management. Visit ilpsports.com today. That's the letters ilpsports.com. ILP Sports Consultants, where your well-being is the priority and your recovery is the mission. Choose ILP Sports Consultants for a healthier sports journey, helping you get back in the game the smart way.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday's Sports on the Sports History Network. I'm here again with my friend and fellow Dallas Cowboys historian, Dave DePaula. And today we're going to talk about the history of Dallas Cowboys opening season games. And Dave, I noticed one thing in my research. From 1965 to 1981, that's 17 years in a row, they won every single opening day game.
I knew you were. Yeah, I thought, Mark, you might bring that up. I think that's still a record.
It could be. That's pretty amazing.
I think that's still a record. I jotted that down. I knew that would catch your eye.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the Patriots might have come close. Well, they weren't even really close. I think they got it up to 10 or 11.
Oh,
but
okay.
It's not even half of, barely,
Right.
a little more than half.
Wow, that's a lot of years in a row.
That was an impressive run, Mark. That was pretty much like our, right there, like the beginning of you and I following, but roughly those years right there.
That's right. That's when they were at their best. That was their peak years.
Yeah, they. I put these in by decade, Mark.
Okay.
And I started in 1960, the first game,
Right.
and there was a book. I think you have it. It's that Tom Landry book. It's called The Last Cowboy. This one here.
Oh yeah, I have that one.
And in there, they talk about the first game ever. And it talks about, it was a Saturday, actually. And it says Tex Schramm was giving away, he was giving away free stuff to make it look like there was more people than there really were,
Right.
And it said that it was 72 degrees at game time. And they were playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were actually a pretty decent team at the time. Cowboys were made up of just pretty much ragtag guys that came from other teams. I think each team had to give them 3 or 4 players. So these were,
Right.
Not too good of players, to be polite. And they actually put up a pretty good game. They ended up losing 35-28. But Eddie LeBaron, he had 345 yards. That's pretty good, for back then.
Yeah, that's amazing.
345.
That's a lot back then.
So that was that was pretty impressive, And the Cowboys were leading and going into the half. They were up 21-17, if you could believe that. But, Pittsburgh came back, took the lead. The Cowboys, they went back and forth a little in the second half, but they ended up losing. And I think they lost. I think the following year, in 61, they ended up winning. They played Pittsburgh again.
That's right.
And they won. Yeah, they won the game 27-24.
Right.
Yep.
One of their few wins that season.
Yeah, exactly. And they, I think for the decade, they were 6-3-1. Mark, those 60-69.
Right.
They had a 6-3. That's pretty good, really, if you think about it.
Well, yeah. The first 5 years. Yeah, the first 5 years they lost 3. Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. They tied. 1962, they tied the Redskins, right?
Yes, exactly. You're right. A tie, 35-35.
Yeah. There's some pretty high-scoring game there. That's a high-scoring game.
No, it really, that was 16,000 fans, by the way. That was one of the lower attendances. I was looking at the attendance. The other ones were in the 20s and 30s. 1965, they opened up against the Giants, which was Landry's old team.
That's right.
And almost 60,000 came out for that one.
Wow.
Yep.
The Giants got a safety, and that was it, right?
The Giants got a exactly. The Giants got a safety, 31-2.
Yeah. And then, so that was the beginning of, you knew when you kind of knew that they had something going there, that they were going to be a good team. Then
You're right.
The Giants again the following season on opening day.
The players would talk. I think it was even the player. I forgot. I don't know if it was Don Perkins. There were several guys that talked about it, but they used to say that Landry was really up for these games against the Giants. They could tell there was an extra thing with him for those Giant games. He always wanted to put on a good showing.
Right.
Because he knew the Maras were at the game. Even when they were on the road, if they were playing in Dallas, Wellington Mara and his sons were there at the game. So he always, being that it was his old team, he always wanted to make a good showing. He always was like was not really, he wasn't a rah-rah type of guy, but he was really, I guess they had a really good week of preparation for those Giant games.
Yeah. And that score was 52-7, right?
Yeah, I think,
Giants.
I don't know. I don't know if the Giants were final.
Mid-60s. The mid-60s, the Giants had some really bad teams.
Yeah, I was a kid at the time. My father was talking about Allie Sherman. He didn't like him at all. He said the guy ruined the team. Yeah. I guess this must have been what he was referring to.
That's right. Sam Huff always mentions that.
He did. Yeah, my father, I remember him saying that as a kid. I was saying, you just hear these things and they stay with you. But they had a good run. And the following years after that Giants 52-7, they ended up playing the Browns, who were kind of a powerhouse back then.
That's right. The Browns had some very good teams.
Yep. And they beat them.
Beat them by a touchdown, right?
Yes, they did. And the following year, they scored 59, Mark. Imagine 59 points back then. They had that was 68, so that was the year that they, actually, I think they got beat by the Browns in the playoffs.
That's right. But they had a very explosive offense.
Yeah, 59 points. I mean, it's it's kind of crazy if you think about it, especially back then.
Yeah. Don Meredith and Bob Hayes, they connected on some long passes.
No, exactly. I mean, they were really, I mean, their offense was kind of ahead of some of the other teams. They had a lot of stuff going on.
That's right.
That a lot of people didn't really see prior to their, multiple. They called it multiple set offense.
That's right.
Tom
Landry was very innovative at that time with the offense. And
they really, they had multiple shifting. I guess he was trying to undo the flex defense.
Right.
Trying to go against the stuff that, he thought would work against his own defense. He was quite ahead of the, he was quite ahead of the curve. The only thing I could say about Landry, though, sometimes he was very stubborn. Yeah. Sometimes it almost worked against him, I think, a few times, really.
Right. So the following year, they played the Cardinals on opening day.
They did. They closed out the decade, and they ended up winning that game, held the Cardinals to a field goal, 24-3. So that was pretty good. Their first decade, 6-3-1, considering they were an expansion team and they started really from nothing.
Right. That's right.
But you're right. That first, the win and the tie. They opened up with a win in 61 and tied in 62. That's what saved them, because the other three were losses.
Yeah.
But then like you said, they took off with 5 straight to close out the decade.
And they opened the next decade against the Eagles.
They did. 1970. And the whole solid decade, 10 wins, 10-0.
10-0. Unbelievable.
Yes. The Philadelphia Eagles. A lot of these games, back then, Mark, we didn't have the television coverage like we have now. We had, maybe 3 games or maybe 2 games on one channel and 1 game on the other, right?
Yeah, I don't remember. I can't remember. So far, all the games that we've mentioned, I don't really remember any of these being I'm sure the ones against the Giants were televised. That was 65 and 66, but I was too young to remember. I was only, 1965. I was 3 years old, so I wouldn't remember that. So, like you said, these games were not televised like they are now. You had the area that we lived in, you got the Jets on one channel, you got the Giants on the other channel, and once in a while they would put in a double header, but you didn't get too many of these. You didn't get to see too many of these games.
No, you're right. I think nationally, that double header would have been like a pretty top game,
Right.
so to speak. Something that would probably be covered by 80% of the country, and the other regions out west might get their local team, but there'd be, coverage of one good game. But then don't forget, in 1970, you had that extra Monday night game. It started on Monday night.
Right.
So we had, and you might have saw a couple of highlights of your team. So on halftime highlights with Howard Cosell, right, you would see maybe 5 or 6 plays. You thought it was the biggest thing, right?
Oh yeah, you didn't want to miss that. You were glued to the TV.
Yeah, it was great, and we had a little 13-inch set in our room. We had a black and white.
Yeah.
And usually by halftime, my father would tell me, to hit the rack, but he didn't care if the TV was on.
Right.
As long as I was, in bed. But you had I'm looking through the list of the 70s here, and I'm looking at all the games, and I'm going to tell you, the only game I remember vividly watching actually was the Monday night opener. The Cowboys played the Colts in 1978.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
Prior to that, they had 1, 2, 3, 8 wins, and if I'm looking at those teams, they played the Eagles twice, and they played all the other games were different. They played Buffalo in 71.
Yeah,
Actually, I'm sorry, I take that back, Mark. They played the Eagles 3 times, 70, 72 and 76.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
76, winning all three of those games by pretty good, holding the Eagles to single scores of single digits, 7 points, 6 points, and 7 points.
Right. The one that kind of perplexed me, I remember hearing the score on the television. I don't think the game was televised. I was kind of perplexed because they played the Buffalo Bills, and the Bills were not a good team at all at that time. And they scored 49 points, but they let up 37 points in that game.
Yes, they did.
I couldn't understand, especially since the 1970 team, as you recall, towards the end of the season, their defense was just not letting up any touchdowns. The teams could barely get a field goal on them.
Yeah, I think they gave up 1 touchdown in 6 games. I think it was 1 touchdown in 24 quarters.
Yeah.
Right up through the San Francisco game, the NFC Championship game. They were really stellar. It was O.J. Simpson was on that team, though.
Yeah, he was, but
they had no passing game, really, so to speak.
No, I just not sure if there was some turnovers. I just couldn't understand how they let up 37 points against a bad team. But
you could probably, I bet you could probably pull up a box score on that game.
Oh, yeah.
And, right?
Yeah, I think you can pull up a box score, but could have been some turnovers.
That's a little, yeah, I'm looking at those games and nobody else. I'm looking at the entire decade. The next closest thing was 21 points by the Cardinals, and that was 1979.
Right.
Look at these opening day games. 7 points. Okay, then you had the 37 points in 1971. 72 on to 79. You had 6 points, 17. These are points against now, the Cowboys. A shutout in 74. They beat the Falcons 24-0.
Right.
Then they had a 18-7 game against the
Rams. The Rams.
Yes. I think, believe it or not, I think you could find that game. That game there might be a full thing of that game on YouTube. I think I ended up watching it recently.
I'll have to look for that.
Because I don't remember that game because 18 was kind of an odd number.
Yeah.
And it caught my eye. And I'm thinking to myself, geez, what the hell kind of score? And I think I ended up going out and finding that game.
Well, I'm going to have to look for that. Yeah. So 72, they beat the Eagles. And 73, it looks like they just barely beat the Bears by a field goal. And the Bears didn't have a good team. They seem to have problems with the Bears because wasn't it 1971, the year they won the Super Bowl? They lost to the Bears, right?
Yes.
In that season.
Yeah, in 1996, it was decades later, but the Bears cleaned their clocks on a Monday night football game. It was an opener. I was going to talk about that when we get to it, but that was another loss to the Bears.
Wow. They have their problems with the Bears. I remember the 1974 opener.
Really?
It wasn't televised, but I just remember that. I remember me and my brother discussing it because they shut out the Falcons 24-0. And the Falcons almost made the playoffs the year before. The 1973 Falcons were 9-5. That was their first really good season. And
was Bob Berry there, Mark, or not? They wasn't there yet.
Bob Berry. Who was the other guy? Bob Lee. They had Bob Lee too, right?
Okay, yep.
It was either Bob Berry or Bob Lee. But I remember me and my brother were pretty excited about that 24-0 victory because we thought, wow, they beat a good team. So this was a good start to the season. And then they lost the next 4 games in a row. And the Falcons wound up being lousy that year. They were 3-11 after going 9-5. In 73, they went 3-11 in 74.
Imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm going to have to look for that Rams game 18-7.
I think I did find that. I'm not 100% sure. I was watching a Rams game and I was like, geez, I don't remember this thing at all, but like we said, they weren't all on television. There wasn't a lot of, you started seeing more of them in the late 70s.
Yeah.
That's when it started to pick up steam.
Right. Well, then 76, they beat the Eagles again. 77, I'm trying to remember, that game might have been televised. It might have been televised, or maybe I'm just remembering it because I know that one's on YouTube. That was a overtime game against the Vikings.
That's right.
So I don't know if it's possible that game could have been televised. And then the game we mentioned.
The Colts game, 38-0. I don't know why it sticks out, Mark, but I remember I was at work. I was working at the ice cream shop this week. I was just working there. We hadn't bought the store yet. I was just an employee. I was, 18, 19, somewhere around there. And it was a Monday night game, and Burt Jones got hurt in the last preseason game.
That's right.
He got some kind of a separated shoulder, or something was wrong with his shoulder.
Yeah, it was never the same.
No, exactly. I don't know if you knew this, but I was reading up on Burt Jones a little when I was looking at this game, and they asked Belichick once, outside of Brady, who's the greatest quarterback you ever seen? And he said, Burt Jones.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
If not for that injury.
No. And the year prior to that, I forgot, Lydell Mitchell had left.
That's
and
right.
He went to the Chargers, I think.
Right. Yeah, he went to the Chargers.
But they still had...
they had John Dutton.
They had John Dutton, and they still had Roger Carr, I think.
Right, the receiver, Roger Carr.
Yes.
Yeah, so...
they were a power in 75, or was it 76? I can't remember. They had a very, very good team. But they were still touting the Colts as being very good in 78. And that's why I remember turning it on up at work, and it went on at 9:00 back then.
Right.
And it started out a little slow, I think. I think they fumbled the opening kickoff, the Cowboys.
Uh-huh.
The Colts tried to kick a field goal, and they missed it.
Right.
So the Colts started out like at the Cowboy 22, and they ended up coming up, and then the Cowboys drove down, and they had a chip shot field goal. The Colts held them. It was like a 20-yarder, not even maybe. I'm not even sure, and they missed that.
Right.
And so, but I'm going to tell you something right now. You could watch that game in its entirety. I didn't watch the whole thing. You go back and watch the first half of that game. So it's broken down by halves. And I got to tell you, I don't want to say it's a highlight reel, but if people want to see what Tony Dorsett was all about, go watch the first half of that game. There's some runs and some screen passes that are, I forgot them until I started looking at the game. Absolutely unbelievable. The guy's acceleration was unbelievable.
Right.
So this was his second season, 78. He took a screen pass, and he went 85 yards with it.
Yeah.
85 yards. It was unbelievable. The cuts he was making, and the acceleration he had after. He would almost have to slow down after these cuts and then pick up speed like it was nothing. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I remember. And that was
21-0 at the half, Mark, by the way. That's what
right.
that game. Cowboys up 21-0 at the half.
And ABC, who televised Monday Night Football at the time, had to be very upset because that was supposed to be a marquee game.
Right, exactly.
As you mentioned, 3 years in a row, 75, 76, 77, the Colts were in the playoffs. And they had a very good team with Burt Jones. I think Burt Jones won the NFL MVP in 76 or 77. He was the MVP. And once he got that injury, it was all over for the Colts.
It was. They had some guy, Mike Kirkland, that
Right.
night playing quarterback. I don't even know who the heck he is.
He might have only played that 1 year.
He could have, right?
He might have only played that one game. I don't.
No, you're right, Mark. I never even heard of the guy.
No.
I didn't do any research or anything on him, but the Cowboys were really dominant. I mean, they interviewed Ted Marchibroda before the game. He was saying they had a great week of practice
Yeah.
and all this other stuff. He was giving all the standard lines, but
Right.
it was I don't know why that game sticks out to me. But it's just of that entire decade, I remember that game vividly.
Yeah, they played a flawless game. They really played a perfect game.
Yeah.
And then the next year, I don't really remember this game. I'm sure it wasn't televised. They played the Cardinals. Only won by 1 point.
Yes. I bet you could find some highlights of that game. I bet you. I don't remember a thing about it. Nothing.
Yeah, I don't remember it either.
And I mean, I was into my 68, 78. So I was in my 11th or 12th year at that point of watching the Cowboys.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they were starting to become, they were being televised quite a bit in the late 70s. They were on TV quite a bit.
That's right. And then the following year, they opened against the Redskins.
Yes, 1980. Was that Joe Gibbs' first year?
It could have been. They didn't do that well.
Yeah, I want to say I remember them making a big deal about that game. I kind of remember that if that was his first year.
His first year was either 80 or 81.
Okay, but they opened against the Skins in both of those years. And I remember one of those years, that was a big thing. They were talking about Joe Gibbs.
Right. And I don't really remember either one of those games that well. But like I said, I don't think those first two seasons with Joe Gibbs, they weren't as good, the Redskins. I think 1 year they finished 8-8, maybe 8-8, 9-7. So they weren't as good. It took Gibbs a couple of years. They had some rebuilding to do, and Theismann. All those years when George Allen was there, he wouldn't let Theismann play. He never let Theismann play.
No,
he wanted Billy Kilmer in there, no matter how.
Unbelievable.
He didn't care how old he was. He wanted Billy Kilmer in there.
Yep. Maybe it could have, Theismann was kind of a, he was kind of, I don't want to say he was a hot dog, but he was kind of a self-promoter. Remember he changed his name?
To rhyme with Heisman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I could see stuff like that rubbing George Allen the wrong way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah, because George Allen was old school.
And then came 82, Mark, and then what happened?
I don't want to talk about that again. And the Steelers weren't even that good anymore, and they still couldn't.
Bradshaw was right when he said it. He said, I always beat the Cowboys. You got to give it to him. He did.
Yeah.
He beat him all the time.
He did. And they weren't even that good anymore in 82, and they still beat them.
They did. That game I bet you is on YouTube. I did not watch that. I'm going to watch that game. They lost 36-28.
Yeah.
And I just don't remember. What I do remember is they made a big deal about the Cowboys winning streak coming to an end.
Right. I think it was a back and forth game. There were several times in the game when Dallas had the lead, and it looked like they were going to win, and then Pittsburgh came back.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I don't remember the game. Like I say, I do remember them talking about the Cowboys' win streak has finally come. That was a big thing. I mean, it still is.
Yeah.
It's still nothing ever really came close to that.
Yeah, because look, after they lost that game to the Steelers, they got 1, 2, 3, 4. Then they won another four in a row.
Yes.
17.
Yes, they did.
So in 22 years, yep, in a 22-year span, they only lost one opening day game. That was to the Steelers. Of course.
Right. And the Steelers, that was, look, it was only a few years removed from those Super Bowl losses.
Right.
Well, it's a 78 loss. It was only 5 years. And, but I mean, and the other one, I mean, and then I think the Steelers beat them again in 79. They played in the regular season. The Steelers won that game. I remember it.
Was that the game where Staubach got knocked out with a concussion?
It could have been. I don't quite remember it. I know they lost to them again in 77 regular season, Tony Dorsett's rookie year. Because I think he was going to start that game. He was saying, it was Pittsburgh, and he was going home. I think it was in Pittsburgh. I can't remember, but I know they beat him in 77 too in the regular season.
Yeah.
They couldn't beat Pittsburgh. I'm sorry, they couldn't.
No, they beat him in the only time they beat him was 1972. Was it 72? Yeah, 72. That was the year Pittsburgh finally had their breakout season. That's when Franco was a rookie, right? That was the same year, the Immaculate Reception.
Yes, exactly.
Dallas did beat them that year. And then after that, they could never beat them.
Imagine that.
Yeah. In fact,
I'll tell you.
In fact, Craig Morton started that game because Staubach was out with the injury.
Really?
The shoulder, 72, Staubach pretty much missed the whole season, right? That's when he had the shoulder surgery.
He did. He got knocked out by what's his name there, in the Rams in this preseason game.
Yep, that's right.
I found going back to that 1971 game against the Bills, that opening game on 71. I found the box score, and I'm looking at it now, and the Bills had 353 yards passing.
Wow.
4 touchdowns. Who the hell was the quarterback?
Billy Shaw.
4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. He was 18 for 30 for 353. Wow. The Cowboys only had 221 yards passing, but they had 160 on the ground. O.J. Simpson wasn't a factor at all. They only had 66 yards rushing in Buffalo.
Right.
But the Bills had a pretty good, let's see. They had 401 net yards total. They outdid the Cowboys in yardage.
Yeah.
And the Bills had 4 turnovers to cap it all off.
I don't know what happened in that game.
The Cowboys had 13 penalties for the Cowboys for 129 yards.
Holy mackerels.
That could have had something to do with it.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Could be.
I mean, that's 129. That's 130 yards of a minus yardage.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Anyway,
1983.
83, Mark. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, listen to me. That one vividly. I remember that.
I'll never forget it.
one thing I can't forget is how extremely humid it was. It was hot and humid. And we watched that game. Yep, we watched that game in our living room, and we didn't have central. We didn't have central air.
Yeah, not too many people did.
No, not too many people had central air back then. And I remember it was just stifling hot, very humid, extremely humid and hot. And by halftime, I was ready to go to bed. I thought, this is a disgrace. It was 23-3.
It was. Listen, it was 23-3 at the half. You're right.
Yeah. I said, this is disgraceful. I don't know. I don't know how much longer I can watch this.
And the Redskins were the champions, right?
Defending champions. Yep.
Defending champions. I was up at the ice cream shop. I got a lot of stuff done early so I could start watching the game. I think we closed back then at 10 o'clock. At this point now, we own the shop.
Right.
And I kept running and going in the back. And, if I had to come out and wait on a customer, and it was not going good. And a buddy of mine was up watching it with me.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a big football. I mean, we were very good friends. He wasn't really big into football. He wasn't really big into sports, but he was hanging out that night, and the Cowboys had less than 100 yards mark that night in the first half.
Yeah.
Less than 100.
Yeah.
Of total offense.
They were doing nothing. They weren't doing anything.
No, but in the third quarter, they had a couple of bombs to Tony. I'll tell you, that second one was, both of them actually were great catches. Right. But one of those ones he pulled it in with one hand was a hell of a catch.
Yep.
Tony Hill, that ignited them. They got back into the game. They were losing, like you said, at the half, 23-3. And they pulled it up 23-17 now. Okay? And Dorsett finished, I think, with 151 yards. He had a great night. And Danny White bootlegged one in they took the lead at 24-23. He ran it in.
That's right.
And I remember for every Cowboy score, I just sat there clapping loudly. My buddy was laughing. He thought he was getting a kick out of it because I was clapping. I wasn't even saying anything. Just clapping loud, just like 20 claps in a row for each score. You know what I mean? Because it was just great. It was the Redskins. You know what I mean? They were getting killed.
Right. Then, so it's 24-23, and then did the Redskins score a touchdown to take the lead again?
They did. The Redskins, oh no. What ended up happening was Ron Fellows picked one off. The Cowboys went up 31-23, okay. And the Redskins ended up scoring a late touchdown to the tight end Warren. Right. He caught a pass. It ended 31-30.
Yep. Yeah,
that was tremendous. I'll never forget that game. That was great.
That was a breakout game for Danny White too.
It was big because, the year before they had knocked Danny White out of that championship game.
That's right. Yeah.
That was the game Hogaboom came in.
Yeah.
And that was at RFK. That was
yeah, we won't talk.
That was the first time the Redskins really beat them in a really big game since the 70s.
Right.
Like Staubach said once, after that 72 game, he said, you could check the records. We never lost to the Redskins in another big game. He says, you watch it, and he says, you could check it. He goes, if you don't believe me. Yeah. So this was really, that 82 game really was the next time they played in a huge game. They ended up beating the Cowboys. That game wasn't as, I rewatched that game recently. It wasn't as much of a runaway as I had originally thought.
No.
Only that picked off that screen pass when they tried to throw that screen pass out there. Right. What's his name tipped it in I think Dexter Manley or Darryl Grant ran it in. But I think Manley might have tipped it. I can't remember, but that was it. That put the nail in the coffin in that 82 playoff game.
Yep. Then the next year, I don't really remember that well. They beat the Rams 20-13.
Yes. I don't remember that myself, really.
Well, it was televised. It was not televised. But the following year, I remember was that Monday night too, right?
Another one I remember vividly. Vividly.
They were singing "Happy Birthday, Joey."
That's right.
It's Joe Theismann's birthday.
They killed the Redskins that night.
That's right.
44-14. Killed them.
Theismann had one of the worst games of his career in that game.
He did. He talked about that. He had 5 picks, Theismann.
Oh, my goodness.
5 picks. And he had a quarterback rating that night of 32.3.
Yeah.
He was talking about it.
Right.
He was 13 for 30 with 5 picks. He actually got benched. They sat him down.
Yep.
And that's when they started singing.
That's right. They started singing Happy Birthday, Joe.
Yeah, that's what he said. And he talks about that in one of those NFL films. He says, you can't believe it. This and that. He starts talking. I remember that game because, once again, it was a Monday night.
That's right.
Same scenario. I was up at the ice cream shop working. I put it on. And it was one of those games you never really had to worry about. They from the get-go, they pretty much just took care of them. It was great.
And things got worse for Theismann because I think it was only maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. That's when the leg injury.
Yep, that's right.
Gruesome leg injury.
Yep, that was the end of his. That was pretty much it for him.
Yeah, that was gruesome. That was also Monday night, right?
Yeah, it was
the Giants.
Yes, it was. That was. You're right. Maybe it was 4 or 5 weeks later.
Right. It was a gruesome injury. Terrible. Now, the following year, I remember pretty vividly, because now that the Cowboys are starting to go downhill, right?
Yes.
This is when you can start to tell that, they're no longer the dominant team that they were. They got Herschel Walker from the USFL.
That's right.
Yep, and he played a big factor in that game.
That was in '86. They ended up winning 31-28.
Right.
And it was a very close game. I think they ended up scoring the first 2 touchdowns. Dorsett scored a touchdown on a screen pass, and then Walker jumps out from like the 5-yard line and he scores. It's 14-zip. But the Giants come back. They end up right before the half. They get 2 scores, like in about a 4-minute span, I think, or 5 minutes at the most. And in the final minutes of the half, they tie it up. So in the halftime, it's 14-14. Right. And you're thinking, oh boy, now what? Because I think but that was the year the Giants went to the Super Bowl, right?
That was one of only 2 losses.
Yes.
They lost their opening game, and then they lost somewhere around mid-season. They lost to the Seahawks. And that was the only 2 losses the Giants had that year. Yeah, and they beat the Broncos in the Super Bowl.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Very good team. I think the Cowboys went 10-6 that year and made the playoffs.
86. Yeah. They did.
They went 10-6 and lost in the playoffs to the Rams, I think.
They did. 17-14, the Cowboys scored in the third quarter. Walker fumbled in the third quarter.
Uh-huh.
The Giants ended up scoring. They went up 21-17 near the end of the third quarter. The Cowboys then went up 24-21. They scored a touchdown. Thornton Chandler, he was a tight end. It was his first catch of the year. It might have been his only catch. I don't even remember the guy catching it, but he did score a touchdown in that game. And then there were a series of fumbles. Both teams had fumbles. They traded possessions. And the Giants went up. They scored a touchdown. So now they're up 28-24. And with 2:10 left, the Cowboys drive downfield. And it was a draw play to Herschel Walker. I'll never forget. He went right up the middle. Boom, into the end zone. 31-28. The Giants were driving.
Yeah.
It went down to the last play of the game, but they couldn't get a playoff. I think they were going to attempt to kick a field goal, and that's how the game ended, 31-28. That was a great game.
It was one of the better Monday night games. That was a Monday night, and that was one of the better Monday night games. Back and forth, and I think it was at Giant Stadium, right?
Yes, it was. If you remember, the funny thing is, Mark, you said it. They picked up Herschel Walker, and then, isn't it amazing, like, they get a guy, and then, like, they play a Monday night opener with this new guy, and he's like, he has a big night. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like they broke him into the lineup slowly. The guy had a big, huge night.
That's right. And I remember they interviewed him about that game, and he said he really was not even that familiar with the playbook yet at that point. Because
I went out to, excuse me, Mark, I went out to training camp that year.
Uh-huh.
And I saw Herschel Walker.
Right.
And I think it was the week they had signed him. He was walking around with a shirt and a tie on. They had just got, they were interviewing him. And, Tony Dorsett was never too happy about that. I saw him at a card signing maybe about 7 years ago.
Right.
There was a dealership here in Danbury, Connecticut.
Uh-huh.
I think he was related. I don't know if I think it was something to do maybe with his wife or anyway, he was coming for signings. He was there several times for a few years there. We went up to see my buddy. My buddy's a huge 49er fan, but he loves Dorsett.
Right.
And so we went up to see him. And we talked about it, and I brought it up to him. I said, the dream back. And I go, I remember what you said. It was somebody's dream, not mine, he says. That's what he said, Dorsett. He didn't like it.
Yeah.
But, and then he was, I think it was it the following year he was traded, or was it 88? I can't remember.
I think 88. I think it was 88.
So it lasted for a couple of years.
Yeah. Now, 1987, they lost to the Cardinals.
Yes.
In fact, they lost 3 years in a row. They lost 87, 88. Well, they weren't good anymore, right? They did not have a good team anymore. Lost to the Steelers again in 88. And then 89. Was 89 Landry's last year, or
89 was Jimmy Johnson's first year. I'll never forget this game. I was up in Newport, Rhode Island with this gal that I was dating.
Right.
She was in some volleyball tournament, and it came up on the screen. We were eating lunch late. Right. The Cowboys had the early game against the Saints. They got Scott 24-0.
Yep.
And that was Jimmy Johnson. I was very upset about the whole Landry thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say I didn't, try to tune in to see what was going on or just to catch a score at least. But I was almost kind of happy about it in a crazy way.
Yeah. In fact, I think it was 28-0, was it?
It could have been. Yeah, it could have been 28-0, something like that.
Yeah, they got shellacked.
Terrible.
Yeah. So then they start to get good again, right? 1990, they beat the Chargers. 91, they beat the Browns. 92, they beat the Redskins. But now they're on their way back to the top, right?
Yes, well, in the 90s, they went 8-2 on opening nights or opening days. And those two losses, one of them was in 93 with no Emmitt Smith. That was the holdout year. They lost to the Redskins in the opener, or was it the second? It was, and then they lost to the Bills the second week of the season.
That's right.
When Charles Haley threw his helmet through the wall because he said, we got to get this guy signed. But then they lost again to that Bears team that I was talking about, that Bears game in 96. But You're right. They beat the Chargers, they beat the Browns in 91, and they beat the Redskins in 92. And I think that was the game where Jimmy Johnson was talking about going up against the big gorilla. You hit him with everything you got. I think that was before that opening season 92 game.
Okay.
That was a big win for them.
Yeah, I think the Redskins were the defending Super Bowl champions, right?
Yes, they were.
That's right.
Yes, they were
champions.
And that was it.
23-10. Then, like you said, they played them again the following year, and Emmitt Smith was holding out. And, for all those people that said, oh, he was only good because he had a great offensive line. Well, you see how much they ran the ball. Those two games that they lost to the Redskins and Bills, they couldn't run the ball at all because Emmitt Smith wasn't there. And then as soon as they got him back, they went on a winning streak.
Yep.
So, finally, in 1994, beat the Steelers.
That's funny.
I don't remember if that game was televised or not.
I don't remember much about it. They beat them good, too, 26-9.
Yeah. And then that was the year before, 1994. So they beat the Steelers, and that was the year before they played the Steelers in the Super Bowl, right?
It was. It was because 95 they opened up. They beat the Giants 35-0. I was at that game. Actually, we took my dad down. My father probably hadn't been to a Giant game since probably the 50s. And
Giants, right?
Yeah, he liked watching it at home, and we talked him into going. Me and my brother went.
Right.
And my father went with us. I kind of felt bad for him. He's a big Giant fan. They got killed. Emmitt Smith scored on the third play of the game, and it was all downhill after that for the Giants.
That's right. I remember that. I remember I was actually at work. I was working the night shift. So I did not see that game, but I did have it, by that time we had the VCRs, so I was recording it, and I was trying not to hear I was trying to keep away from my coworkers so that I wouldn't hear anything about the game. And then when I got home, I watched it, and that was a big game for Emmitt Smith, and they really got off to, and that season they really got off to a hot start. And it looked like
they did. They started faltering towards the end a little. They lost that crazy third down game to Philadelphia, fourth down. In a foot.
Yeah. And
there was a couple other games they dropped near the end of it. It wasn't the kind of momentum you would want going into a playoffs.
No, not at all. They started the season really hot, and then, like you said, towards the end, it didn't look like they were going to do that well in the playoffs, but then the playoffs came and they got hot again.
They did. That Giant game, at halftime, they retired Phil Simms' jersey, and Lawrence Taylor came out and threw him a pass.
All right.
That was good for the Giants fans, at least, but that was pretty good. I remember that.
Yeah.
I guess, and Taylor said it was unexpected. I think Taylor was a little tipsy that night. He talks about it open. You know how that guy is. He doesn't care. He talks about it openly. He goes, and I didn't know that he was going to do that to ask me to come out and he says, I'm going to throw one. Keep going. He says, he's waving him further and further, Phil Simms. And who knows whatever the hell else he was on, Taylor, at that point in time. But that was the highlight for the Giants fans that night.
Yeah.
But I think what's his name? I think that night, Kevin Smith, the cornerback for the Cowboys, got hurt. And that's what prompted them to go out and get Deion Sanders.
Oh.
Kevin Smith got us an Achilles that night.
Oh.
They lost him in that game, and that's what happened with that, I'm pretty sure.
Yep. Then again, They lost to the Bears the following year.
They lost to the Bears. Listen, listen. I watched some highlights of that game. That was absolutely terrible. Let me just tell you that. Okay, who the hell was quarterback in the Bears? Eric Kramer. Okay, that guy. Eric Kramer was quarterbacking the Bears. It was a disgrace. And I forgot there was a guy that scored a couple of touchdowns. I forgot his name even. It was terrible. They were horrible. Emmitt Smith fumbled. Deion Sanders was playing receiver. He fumbled. Aikman coughed up the ball. And then near the end of the game, I'll never forget it. They ran some fake play with Emmitt Smith, a dive like into the line. Emmitt Smith jumps up over and lands on his neck and his head. They had to cart him off. He was on the ground for at least 10 minutes. Remember that?
Now I remember that game. Now that you mentioned, I remember because you said that play with Emmitt Smith, and now I remember. And that was a Monday night game.
Yes, it was. That's why I remember it.
That's right. And Walter Payton actually came down on the field to see if Emmitt Smith was okay, because there was fear that he might have broke his neck.
Yes, he was down. He ended up playing the next week.
Yeah,
I remember that. There was that went on all week. Emmitt Smith, is he ever going to play again this season? There was a lot of talk about all that. Following week, he comes out and plays.
Yeah. I guess it wasn't as bad as it looked, but it looked really bad because, like you said, he landed right on the top of his head.
It was terrible, Mark. It was terrible.
So they got another win the following year against the Steelers.
There you go.
A big win, 37-7.
Oh, I remember that game. That game was in Pittsburgh. I remember that because a buddy of mine, he's a big Cowboy fan. He came over. He always liked watching the games at home. Right. This guy. It was the only time he ever came over for a game. He doesn't live too far from me. And he was, at that time I was involved. I was doing fantasy football even back then. I think I got involved in it in 92, actually. Uh-huh. And I had the satellite dish back then. I had my own satellite. And so we were jumping from game to game for the fantasy. He was getting mad. We were able to split the screen. I kept the Cowboys on the screen at all times, but it might have gone into the little box. He didn't like that. That's why I remember that 37-7 game.
Oh. So now, Switzer's not there anymore by this time, right?
Exactly.
Now,
Chan Gailey takes over.
Right. And now they start going downhill.
Only for 2 years, though.
Okay. 2 years.
98 and 99, yeah.
They didn't.
But in 99, they had that overtime win against the Redskins. I remember that game vividly. Aikman throwing a bomb in overtime to Ismail, Rocket Ismail, right down the middle of the field. That was it. It was, a walk-off victory.
Right. And they won their opener in 98 against the Cardinals.
They did. I don't remember that game at all.
Yeah. And then you say the Redskin game was overtime?
The Redskin game was overtime, 41-35, yeah.
Right. Well, that's pretty much... after that, I pretty much started losing interest, so you'll have to...
I got a bunch of ones here that I looked them up that... So they were 8-2 in the 90s. So that's pretty good.
That's good
for that decade, And in 2000, I think that decade they went to. They were terrible, 4-6, and the team was terrible. Campbell was for 3 years. I mean, Parcells came in for 4 years and started getting really good again. I mean, he sized up. He procured a lot of talent. He's the one who drafted DeMarcus Ware.
Oh, okay.
So, but if you go through the decade, they lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right out of the gates, first 5 years, all losses.
Wow.
They lost to Minnesota, lost to the Falcons. They lost to the Eagles in 2000. In 01, they lost to the Buccaneers 10-6. I don't remember that. 2002, I remember this one, though. I was away on a vacation. My buddy calls me up, and he says, "You're going to watch the game." I was in Washington State.
Uh-huh.
And I was doing, there was a national park out there, and I was doing the park, and I was staying in this tiny little town. But the game was on because it was nationally televised. The Houston Texans' first game. They come out of the gates. They beat the Cowboys 19-10.
Wow.
I watched the highlights the other day. I was like, this is unbelievable. The Cowboys just had a terrible night. They couldn't convert, and Quincy Carter couldn't do anything. He was terrible. He couldn't convert any plays. Not even big, third and short. Third and short, couldn't convert them. A 3rd and 1. I mean, they had to think about it, though, Mark. Emmitt Smith was still there.
Yeah.
He's playing now at this point with Quincy Carter, Antonio Bryant, this other receiver they got from Pittsburgh, and Joey Galloway that they ended up getting from the Seahawks.
Uh-huh.
And I think they were losing at the half 10-3. And then this running back, Michael Wiley, he scores a touchdown. They tie it up. But David Carr, who's the brother of the other Carr that plays now for the Saints, used to play for the Raiders, he ends up throwing a bomb to this receiver, Bradford, and they go up 17-10. Then they get a safety that ends the game 19-10. It was an embarrassment because it was their first game, and it was in Houston. And the people were going crazy, absolutely crazy. That was 2002, And then for the rest of the decade, they lost 2 more games. Falcons, they lost to Minnesota, and then they won. They beat San Diego, if you could believe it or not. They were only 1-3 with Parcells on opening night. I thought they'd have a little better record with him. The team was getting pretty good. Yeah. They lost to the Jaguars 24-17 in 2006. In 07, they beat the Giants, though, 45-35. They had a great record against the Giants on opening nights.
Yeah.
From this point on, I think they beat the Giants 6 out of 7 times on opening nights. They beat the Browns in 08. And they beat the Bucks in 09. So that was the Wade Phillips era. Those were all 3 wins, 07, 08, and 09. Giants, Browns, and the Bucks. But that they closed out that decade. They were 4-6. Good thing they had those. They had good things. They had the last 3 wins there. That would have been terrible. And then from 2010 to 2019, they were 500, 5-5. The game I remember a few games, but they played the Giants 6 times in that decade, from 2010 to 2019. 6 opening day games against the Giants.
Wow.
And a lot of them, let me just think, 1, 2, 3. I think 4 of those 6, or maybe even 5, were night games, were Sunday or Monday night games.
Yeah.
Oh, in 2012, they beat the Giants 24-17, and then in 2013, they beat the Giants 36-31. This receiver they had, Kevin Ogletree, he had 2 touchdowns. He had a huge game. The guy came out of nowhere, 2 touchdowns and a bunch of receptions, and then they lost to the 49ers in 14. In 2015, that was the year they went to the playoffs. So that was the year that was the Des Bryant year when the Cowboys got robbed against the Packers up there in the playoffs. That catch they said he made that wasn't a catch.
Right.
They had a good team that year. And then in 2015, they beat the Giants again, 27-26 on a Sunday night. The following year, they lost to the Giants by a point, 20-19, on another Sunday night game, because what's his name? I can't think of his name. Terrence Williams, he was receiver. He couldn't get out of bounds. He could have got out of bounds. They could have kicked the field goal and tied it up, or won, actually, by 2 points. Right. He's running towards the middle of the field instead of the sidelines. No wonder you didn't want to watch the games. He couldn't get out of bounds, Mark. They had a shot of winning that game. Imagine that. And then they beat the Giants again in 2017, 19-3 on a Sunday night. Again, a Sunday night. Lost to the Panthers. Crazy score, 16-8. And then they beat the Giants again in 2019, 35-17 on a Monday night. So 5 out of 6 times they beat. But the game I remember the most was 2011. 2011, they lost to the Jets. Romo, brutal interception at the end of the game. Brutal on the sideline. He was very, a lot of these games that I end up watching, again, Romo's the quarterback. He was he really was. He was extremely exciting to watch. He really was. He was probably one of the reasons why I continued watching. He was that good. Right. But he would make crazy, crazy mistakes, like really bonehead plays. Like earlier in the game, he did a quarterback draw, and on the way into the end zone, they would have went up by 2 touchdowns with about 7 minutes to go in the game. The Jets would not have caught him. Right. He fumbles on the 2 or 3 yard line going into the end zone. And then the Jets, it's crazy. The Jets scored. Then they were coming back. The Cowboys, they were driving downfield. He throws a crazy pass on the outside. And who's covering out there? Revis, of all people. And I'm like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? I said, that was I remember that game vividly because I was thinking of Joe Beningo from the Fan. But the Cowboys had a 23-10 lead in that game. 23-10. And they blew it. They had a touchdown. Des Bryant scored a touchdown. Felix Jones, the running back, scored a touchdown. And what ended up happening was they blocked a punt. The Jets blocked a punt, and they tied it up 24-24. The Cowboys fumbled, like I said. Romo fumbled at the 3. Then he threw a pick to Revis. The Jets kicked a field goal and won the game. It was brutal. In fact, the guy that kicked the field goal was an ex-Cowboy. I think it was like a 52 or a 53-yarder. Wow. And the other night was an opening night. It was a big game, Mark. 40-0 against the Giants. It was the defense. I got to tell you something. The defense looked really good.
40-0. Wow.
40-0. They beat them the other night.
I heard that they won, but I didn't hear the score. I didn't know it was that bad.
If the defense could stay healthy, well, this week they play the Jets. So we'll see. I mean, the Jets got what's his name. I don't think he's going to do. I hate to say it, but he's the quarterback there. I don't know. Maybe if he makes vast improvements in 1 week, maybe. But the Jets' defense is very, very good. Yeah. Very good. And I don't know what the Cowboys' offense is going to do against them. Yeah. If it's a very low-scoring game, the Jets have a very good shot to win on defense. But the Cowboys' defense is very, very, very. Their defense was good last year, but what didn't impress me last year was once again their tackling. I don't care if they got all these flashy players, and they do get a lot of turnovers. They do. Yeah. But if you can't tackle, when you go up against playing a solid team like the 49ers that have a real solid running game and they have very good coaching and they have very good play calling, if you can't tackle, it's all going to catch up to you in the playoffs. I don't care what anybody says.
Absolutely. You have to be able to tackle. You have to be able to block, and you have to be able to tackle. Otherwise, you're not going to win in the playoffs, like you said.
No, you're not. I mean, but they had 7 sacks against the Giants the other night. And Parsons only had 1 sack. This guy's something else. I'm telling you. He's got a motor like he's very completely different player. He's a linebacker, but he plays on the end and he's rushing. Sometimes he goes back into coverage, but he's got a motor like Randy White. This guy doesn't stop. Wow.
No.
He doesn't. And he's getting double teamed, and he's opening up opportunities for other guys to get sacks, which has ended up happening. Dorrance Armstrong had 2 sacks, and there was a couple other guys. But this Parsons, if you get a chance to watch it Sunday against the Jets, if you get him in, you should put it on because he's something to see. You'd be impressed.
Parsons. I think there's a chance I might be watching some of that game because my wife and all her family are big Jets fans. So she might want to watch that game.
If you watch it, well, you might want to keep your mouth shut if they're all Jets fans. But I mean, just you pay attention to him, number 11. He's something else. I'm telling you. Even my buddy stopped by the house today when I was doing some work outside, and he's a huge Giant fan. So obviously, he says Lawrence Taylor, the greatest defensive player of all time. And he says, this guy's the closest thing I've ever seen to Lawrence Taylor, he said. He's if he doesn't get hurt, he could be like Lawrence Taylor. He said this, not me.
Wow.
He's very good. They picked up a real solid corner. His name escapes me right now, but he played for New England. One of these guys doesn't say much, got a ton of experience, a real solid player, because they needed to shore up the other corner. They really did. That was their weak link. Right. And I don't know if somebody said something to Diggs, this kid, his brother's the receiver for the Bills, but, right. I mean, he had some terrible plays in the 49ers game last year, in the playoff game, the divisional game against the 49ers. He had a play where he looked like he could have really laid the lumber to the 49ers tight end, that guy Kittle. He just came up. I don't know how you miss. I don't know how, as a professional football player, you come up, attempt to make a tackle and completely miss.
Yeah.
But the other night, he was tackling. And I'm wondering if it was just a leftover from a bad taste in his mouth from that game from last year, because people were killing him. I was killing him. Right. I was like, how can you had a chance to jar the ball loose on that play. That was a huge play in that game. And he misses a tackle like that. Anyway, he was hitting guys the other night, so that's an encouraging sign. And they got this Van Der Esch out of Idaho. He's been there. This is his 5th or 6th year. He's very good, very solid. He's kind of a throwback player. You would like him, 55. Very good, very rangy, a big guy, 6'4", 200. He was a typical Parcells linebacker. When he had those.
Okay, that will conclude our podcast for today. Hope you enjoyed it, especially those of you who are our Dallas Cowboy fans. Until next time, take care and God bless.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Hello, football friends. This is Darren Hayes of the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, and I'd like to invite you to the portal of positive football history, Pigskin Dispatch and pigskindispatch.com. We talk about everything that centers around the game of American football, expert discussions, the origins of the games, the great players, teams, and coaches, and more, and some great guests and insights from experts. We have new episodes 3 to 4 times a week, and you can find us on sportshistorynetwork.com, pigskindispatch.com, or your favorite podcast provider.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.